Hello, welcome to English 3110. I am Michael Buckoff, your instructor. I graduated many years ago from Brigham Young University in Spanish. I did my graduate work in linguistics. I graduated from Cal State University, San Bernardino, back in the 90s with a focus on English composition and an emphasis in TESOL, teaching English as a second language. We will use two books in this course, Language Files 12th edition, and then the English Language by me. This is kind of a workbook. This is where we will spend 90% of all our time in the classroom, and you should be reading whatever we're studying at the time. You should be using the textbook for background information. For example, if we're focusing on phonetics, then whatever the Language Files has about phonetics, read that. And then we'll be working on practice exercises in the workbook to help us understand that particular area. Here's the course description, and we're focusing in this course on phonetics, phonology, morphology, syntax, semantics, pragmatics, and psycho and sociolinguistics. So I want to talk about each of those fields briefly, give you an idea of what you can expect as we go through this class. Phonetics is the study, what our focus is the study of how sounds are produced in the vocal tract, right? So we'll be looking at all of the consonants, the vowels, the diphthongs, monophthongs, all of those sounds in the English language, and we will learn how to identify the number of sounds a word has, and then correlate each of those specific sounds with IPA symbols. So you see the word meat, it is transcribed as the M, the big I, and the T, right? That's one of the things we will do in phonetics. That's the largest, the biggest kind of focus we'll have in phonetics. And the first part of our course is very tough, very tedious. But as we go through the course, it gets easier and easier and easier, you will find. Okay, in phonology is the study of how sounds are organized in a language to encode meaning. We might look at something like this. We have the word reads, and notice how the S here is pronounced as a Z. We have the word books, and the S is actually pronounced as an S. Then we have houses, and the actual ES is pronounced as an additional syllable is. So phonology will say, well, why? You know, why is the S in one case pronounced more as a Z? Or why is the other S pronounced as an S? Or when do we create a new syllable at the end of the word with the S? And with phonology, we will answer that particular question and other things. Okay, so let's keep going. So the next area is after we've done phonetics and phonology, we will get into morphology. So morphology is study of the constructions of words out of smaller units called morphemes. These morphemes can have either meaning or grammatical function. So there's two main things that we will do in morphology, right? We'll take a look at what's called isolating morphemes. For example, we take the word establishments, we break it into establish, and then meant, and then S. Establish is the root. Meant is a derivational morpheme because it changes the word from a verb to a noun. Notice how establish, I established, blah, blah, blah. That's a verb, but establishment is actually a noun. And then the S at the end is the inflectional, I'm getting it wrong, plural S ending, because it makes it more than one. And that's one of the areas in morphology. So we take a word, we break it into smaller parts, and we begin to figure out what those units of meaning or grammatical function are doing. That would be something that we would do. The second thing that we do in morphology is it's called tree diagrams. How about this? So we take the word establish and we separate it, establish plus meant plus S. So establish is a verb, we have establishment is a noun, and establishments is also a noun. So we will learn how to diagram words in this nature. Syntax. The study of the construction of the study of how words, or the study of sentences and how they're constructed out of smaller units called constituents. So kind of like what morphology is to a word, syntax is to a sentence. And believe it or not, this is the main thing we will do in syntax, the dreaded tree diagram. Not everybody wants to do this. Not all professors will teach this. I like it. I think it's important. You can really understand how a sentence fits together by diagramming that sentence. Notice here we will study syntax in this course. Very simple sentence, right? There's only one subject and one verb there. It's easy, right? But then if you look at kind of how I diagrammed it, right? So I started off with we as a pronoun. You notice that there. You have will as an auxiliary verb, and then study as a verb, syntax is a noun, in is a preposition, and then this is a determiner, and then you have course. That's the first step in drawing a true diagram, is to identify the parts of speech of those words or the lexical categories of those words, right? Then the step 2 is we talked about how sentences are constructed out of smaller units called constituents. So we need to identify, using some phrase structure rules that we will learn, we try to begin grouping things together. So the auxiliary and the main verb become a verb phrase. We have this course forms a noun phrase, and then in this course forms a prepositional phrase. You see that right there, right? So we're kind of figuring out all these constituents here. Kind of like that. And then notice how the verb phrase kind of breaks up into 3 parts. The verb phrase, the noun phrase, and the prepositional phrase. And then once we look at the whole thing, we have what's called the sentence. So the sentence breaks into the 2 main parts, the noun phrase and then the verb phrase, and then it's everything else. So that's something that we will learn how to do when we study syntax. So notice how in the beginning we focus on individual words, right? And we break the words into sounds. Then we go from breaking words into sounds, words into meaningful units or parts. Then we go to looking at words within sentences, and it just keeps getting bigger from there. That's my strategy. Start small, finish big. That's how we will go in this course. Semantics looks at meanings of words and things. We have what's called homophones, whole versus whole. We have big versus colossal. We would say that whole and whole, these are homophones, words with the same phonetic representation but different spellings, different meanings. We have big and colossal. You can look at these as being synonyms, which means they're similar in some way, right? Maybe not exactly. Big maybe is not the same degree big as colossal is, for example. So that's it. We won't spend a lot of time in this area. Pragmatics. All right. So in pragmatics, we look at the study of how meaning is influenced by the context, the relationship between meaning and context, right? We look at kind of 2 main things, direct speech acts and indirect speech acts. Here's some examples. I ask you whether Maria has completed her test. It's very easy to see, because of the word ask, that this functions as a question, is trying to elicit information. Even though it doesn't have a question mark, we know what's going on there. Did Maria finish her exam? You can say yes or no, and you have satisfied the purposes of that question. Now, indirect speech acts a little bit different. I don't know if Maria completed her test, your friend says to you, and then pauses for you to answer. Right? So you can probably infer that that's a question, even though it's not directly framed as such. The next one is, can you tell me if Maria completed her test, right? Even if you say, yes, I can tell you, or no, I can't, you still haven't really answered that question. So these are examples of what's called indirect speech acts. So we'll talk about what those are, how they work in conversational English. Okay, the next part, the last part, is what's called psycholinguistics. We will look in 2 areas, child language acquisition and second language or adult language acquisition. We'll explore, discuss some prominent theories in both disciplines, so you got to get a sampling of kind of how children learn, how adults learn, and so on. We have other things I want to talk about briefly. No makeup quizzes or tests are allowed, but I do have this caveat right here. You can see that. Show up, attend class. Be careful about missing too many classes. So you got 3 unexcused absences or 1 full letter grade deduction, 4 unexcused absences. You can fail this course. Basically 2 weeks if you miss more than 2 weeks. Be careful about being late. You can see the grade system. Okay, here is our calculation. So I think if everything goes the way it normally does, right? So I'll give you 15 percentage points just for being in the class. You got your 3 quizzes will be worth 25% if I get the 3rd quiz done. If I only get 2, then those 2 will be 25%. You'll have 2 tests worth 40% and a final exam. Okay, you can look at the rest of it here and you can kind of see how everything is structured. Okay, the main thing is the beginning, like I said, is the beginning part of the course is much more difficult than the end of this course. So don't have a heart attack on the first quiz on phonetics and phonology if you get 65 or 70. If you get 65 or 70, you should be really happy. That would be good, because you can definitely bring that up as you go through the course. I've had scores as low as 25% on the phonetics quiz, really. So it's just a matter of whether you learn the international phonetics alphabet or not, right? You got to learn that, you got to memorize that, and then use that as you're completing the quizzes and the tests as it relate to the first area of our course. So hang in there. Remember, it ain't over till it's over, right? If you feel like you're sinking and you're underwater and you can't get up and you can't pass this course, come by my office hours and talk to me. I will continue to have Zoom office hours and then physical office hours in University Hall. So you have 2 options. You can just pop in on the computer and talk to me, or you can come by my office hours and do it that way. All right, and welcome everybody. Hang in there and let's make this a great course.